We begin with the latest on the escalating crisis over Ukraine. In the last hour, the U.S. President Joe Biden has announced what he called the first tranche of sanctions against Russia for its incursion in eastern Ukraine. The American action follows a string of punitive measures set out earlier by European leaders. Biden says the sanctions will target Russian banks and oligarchs and Moscow's access to Western financing.
So today, I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions to impose costs on Russia in response to their actions yesterday. These have been closely coordinated with our allies and partners and will continue to escalate sanctions if Russia escalates. We're implementing full blocking sanctions on two large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank. We're implementing comprehensive sanctions on Russia's sovereign debt. That means we've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either. Starting tomorrow and continuing in the days ahead, we'll also impose sanctions on Russia's elites and their family members. They share in the corrupt gains of the Kremlin policies and should share in the pain as well. And because of Russia's actions, we've worked with Germany to ensure Nord Stream 2 will not, as I promised, will not move forward.
DW correspondent Oliver Salet joins me now from Washington. Oliver, what do we make of the U.S. president's response?
Well, a very strong condemnation, Michael. He called Vladimir Putin's actions a flagrant violation of international law and referred to his speech that we heard just yesterday, saying that he believes that Putin would go much further, that we might see a major military attack on all of Ukraine. And he also questioned the Ukrainian right to even exist. So therefore, what President Biden in the last days and weeks announced, that there will be sanctions following Russian troops crossing into Ukraine and invading Ukraine. This is what we heard here today. And some of them are blocking two Russian financial institutions, cutting off Russia from the debt market so they cannot refinance their sovereign debt. And then also targeting Russian elites, families, and this is actually the first time that President Biden spoke about the oligarchs and their connection to Vladimir Putin. So a first tranche of sanctions, but it's also important to point out here that there will be more and can be more should Vladimir Putin decide to escalate the situation further.
What are people saying about how much of an impact these sanctions will really have?
Yeah, that's really the big question because, of course, this is not a surprise for Vladimir Putin and for Russia, and they've had a lot of time in thinking about exactly this question. It's certainly a first step. It's a dramatic one. Russia sees now, from the perspective of the White House, that they have to pay a price for their actions. It also leaves the door open for Vladimir Putin because there are more sanctions to come only if Putin decides that he wants to attack Ukraine further, that he wants to move his troops beyond the separatist-controlled areas. So there is still, of course, a chance for him to steer back or to decide for a diplomatic path. But, of course, the U.S. expectation is not as optimistic anymore. The problem is, of course, that Vladimir Putin might have factored all that in already.
Oliver, how likely is the U.S. government to launch further measures against Russia? I suppose that has a lot to do with what Russia does.
Yeah, that's just right, Michael. It really depends on what's going to happen next. Just keep in mind there will be no military intervention. Ukraine is not a NATO member, so we're talking about further sanctions. And that really depends on the question, will Russia move their troops beyond the separatist-controlled areas? Will it be a full-fledged invasion? Will it move beyond the Donbass? Will Russia attack Kyiv? Will they conquer all of Ukraine? All those questions are circulating right now. But again, no matter what they do, there will be no military actions taken. So certainly the measures that the United States and the NATO partners have are limited. The concern is then also that Belarus might be integrated into the Russian Federation and that there are even further and stronger implications in the months and perhaps years to follow.
Soviet Union 2.0. DW correspondent Oliver Salet in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Earlier, Vladimir Putin raised the stakes, saying he now recognizes the entire territory of two breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine as independent. The Russian president made the announcement a day after recognizing the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics as independent states. The latest move could herald a Russian push further into eastern Ukraine, across the current front line, into territory currently held by Ukrainian forces. Here's what Vladimir Putin had to say.
We recognized the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, which means we recognized all their founding documents, including the Constitution. And the Constitution defines the borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions at the time when they were part of Ukraine. But we hope, and I emphasize this, that all the contentious issues will be resolved in negotiations between the authorities in Kyiv and the leaders of these republics. Unfortunately, at this stage, we understand that this is not possible because hostilities are continuing there and could intensify.
DW correspondent Matthias Berlinger is in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine. Matthias, explain to us the significance of this latest announcement by the Russian president.
This, of course, raises the stakes and it makes a Russian incursion much more probable than if he had contented himself to the actual borders of these controlled territories, these separatist-controlled territories. These self-proclaimed republics control about a fourth to a third of the territory of these two districts of Ukraine, including both capitals, district capitals, and some areas around. But vast parts of these districts are under Ukrainian government control, and he now makes claims to these territories. This makes, of course, a military action to gain control of these territories more probable. There has been some confusion about this yesterday. However, this is not unexpected, and as we heard yesterday, that Putin basically claims the whole of Ukraine as part of Russia.
How are people taking this where you are in the Donetsk region?
We've seen in this region an escalation of violence during the past 5 days in the lead up to this decision. Mostly what we've seen is shelling from the separatist side onto villages controlled by the Ukrainian army and also onto military posts, but a lot of civilian villages as well. So people here are, of course, scared of an escalation, have been scared of an escalation for some time. This, of course, makes it even more probable that this escalation will really come, and it will happen here in this area. Today I went to one of these villages, and the people there have been basically sitting in their basement for 5 days now. They're really scared of what's happening. Many people are escaping. Right now, people mostly are escaping from the front line, from these villages that are being shelled. But of course, all over the place, and here in the city, that's 70 kilometers from the line, fear is growing.
Fear, scared, and also no doubt looking to see how their government is reacting. Can you tell us how the Ukrainian government is responding to the threat from Russia?
Up until now, the Ukrainian government has been very measured, very restrained. They have, of course, said that this does not make sense to them, that these territories are Ukrainian by international law, and that they will not cede these territories. But they are also trying not to contribute to the escalation. The Kremlin, these shellings, according to the assessment of the Ukrainian government, these shellings had the purpose of luring Ukraine into a response that might then be used as the pretext for an incursion. Ukraine is trying to avoid this, but of course, if the attacks from the separatist side and the Russian army that is now stationed there will increase, the Ukrainian army that is stationed all along this line will somehow react.
Matthias Berlinger in Kramatorsk, many thanks. DW has been speaking with people on the streets of Kyiv to get their reactions to this latest Russian move?
We're really afraid about our democracy, about our country, about our freedom. We really hope that Russia will be stopped. But regarding all situation, we think that lots of restrictions should be done before it's all completed. I think we try to show our whole world that we are a really good country and we deserve to be free.
So we are living in a hard time for Ukraine, and a lot of people are experiencing fear every day, like going to bed and waking up. We don't know where exactly we're gonna be, like, in danger, like when Kyiv will be like in real danger for us. So I think Ukraine generally protesting every day just by appreciating our culture and history. Like every day is like a fight for us to survive another day, to be in a united country.
Orysia Lutsevich is head of the Ukraine Forum at the foreign policy think tank Chatham House in London and joins us now. Welcome to DW. What was your reaction to Russian President Putin's speech last night, in which he questioned Ukraine's right to statehood?
Well, last night's Putin's address to Russian nation was very much in line with his quasi-historical essay he has issued last summer, where he exactly says Ukraine is an artificial state that has been created by these puppet, it's a puppet regime. So basically it's in line of denying Ukraine a statehood, saying it's not a real country. It's quite humiliating for the 1,000-year-old history of Ukraine. And I think that it was, in a way, a quasi-declaration of war on the Ukrainian state.
He's essentially saying that Ukraine is not legitimate, and yet at the same time, he is acknowledging, accepting, embracing the existence of these breakaway republics as, in fact, independent states. What do you make of the logic there?
Well, the logic is that, of course, Ukraine exists only as an extension of a Russian civilization, and it can only exist as either in full coherence with Russian governance, the Russian autocratic kleptocracy and orthodoxy, or otherwise, if it rebels against these kinds of values, it's a non-Ukraine that is being manipulated by the United States, Poland, Austro-Hungarian, you name it. So Putin basically says, if it's Ukrainians who love Russia, they are true Ukrainians, all other Ukrainians are un-Ukrainians.
Do you expect Russia to stop at sending troops into Luhansk and Donetsk?
Honestly, I think Russia keeps full deployment around Ukraine's border. It has made new crossing into Ukrainian territory from the east, of course, unobstructed because the border is being controlled by Russia at that point. But I imagine that the deployment will continue, and we may see that Russian troops will move into closer proximity to existing line of conflict between right now currently guarded by the proxy groups and Ukrainian armed forces.
I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying that regardless of how this unravels over the next coming days or weeks, that you see a sort of a permanent deployment of Russian troops in Ukraine?
Well, absolutely. They are already preparing to build military bases, and this is signed in this agreement of treaty with these quasi-republics that will permit Russia to permanently station its troops, similar to what we see already happening in Belarus. And today we hear Russians are not retreating from Belarus, and they continue to threaten the capital of Ukraine from the north.
Orysia Lutsevich from Chatham House in London. Really appreciate your time and your perspective. NATO has condemned the escalation of the crisis over Ukraine and Russia's recognition of two breakaway regions as independent states. The alliance's Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, has described it as the most dangerous moment in a generation. He said Russia has not stopped planning for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine and warned against ongoing provocations in the east of the country. Stoltenberg added that NATO would continue to provide Ukraine with strong political support.
This is a crisis created by Russia alone. We commend Ukraine for its restraint in not responding to Russia's repeated provocations. We stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people and its government. Allies are united in their full support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders.
The 27 European Union member states have unanimously agreed on an initial set of sanctions targeting Russia. The EU's Foreign Affairs Chief, Josep Borrell, says the measures will affect members of parliament and other individuals involved in deploying troops, and that the package will hurt Russia.
The grave violations Russia is committing will not go unanswered. They are not going unanswered. We are strongly united in this front, and we will raise the level of sanctions substantially according with the Russian behavior, because many question marks are pending on these critical moments.
Russia's escalation of the crisis over Ukraine has brought a flood of condemnation from Western leaders. President Putin's decision to recognize two breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine as independent states has also prompted punitive sanctions. The toughest at this stage is likely to be Germany's decision to halt the key Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project. This has been built to bring Russian gas to Europe, but still needs the go-ahead from German regulators, which Chancellor Olaf Scholz now says has been suspended indefinitely.
German Chancellor Scholz on his way to announcing a key foreign policy decision to halt the highly controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline in response to Russia's recognition of two separatist regions in Ukraine.
The situation today is fundamentally different, and therefore, in view of the latest developments, we have to reassess the situation also with regard to Nord Stream 2.
Nord Stream 2 aimed to transport Russian gas directly to Germany under the Baltic Sea. Its construction was finished last year and was pending regulatory approval. For a long time, both Russian and German leaders, including Scholz in the past, had defended the project, but it had plenty of very vocal enemies. Ukraine as a start because it undercuts its own pipelines, but also the US and various EU countries concerned it would give Russia too much power and leave Europe vulnerable. Those countries welcomed Tuesday's decision, with Ukraine's foreign minister calling it morally, politically and practically correct. Big words of support towards the German Chancellor, who had previously been criticized for being too vague on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.